Back then, you were dating political hacks, which was a mistake, which was your first mistake in
absolutely.
retrospect. So this is not a dating show, so we're not going to.
I haven't even gotten to talk yet.
We're not going to do the lowlights. I know you haven't got to talk yet. I'm already talking about your exes. Hello, welcome to the Bulwark's Next Level Sunday interview. I'm Tim Miller. I'm here with my friend Brianna Keilar. I'm so excited of CNN. It is Veterans Day weekend. We're going to talk about veterans issues because Brianna, if you're an MSNBC viewer, you're not a CNN viewer. That's okay. But I'm telling you, I wanted to pick somebody from CNN that I could just suck up to and say they're doing a great job of interviewing and have everybody know that it's not because like I'm angling for, better slots on the show or anything like that. So I've Brianna on for that reason, and because she's a military spouse and started the Homefront program, vertical column.
Yeah,
what are we calling it?
So,
column? Yes,
column.
at CNN. But I want to start here. So this reason we used to hang out a little bit, on the circuit in DC. I'd see you, and back then you were dating political hacks, which was a mistake, which was your first mistake in retrospect. So this is not a dating show, so we're not going to.
I haven't even gotten to talk yet.
We're not going to do the lowlights. I know you haven't got to talk yet. I'm already talking about your exes. And then I guess at a bar you met a Green Beret. Is that what happened? This was after I moved. I leave and you're just, where were you? Were you at Off the Record and a Green Beret walks in?
It was just sort of a random place near the White House. I was covering the White House at the time, and I met my now husband, but I didn't end up dating him. I actually tried to set him up with my friends.
Who?
People you would know. I'm not going to name them because I'm not putting it all out there like you are, Tim. But it didn't work out. He ended up...
Could I guess? Could I start guessing?
No. But, you know them. So I tried to do some setting up. It didn't take... I really did not know him well. We were acquaintances. And he ended up deploying again to Afghanistan. When he got back, I bumped into him around town in D.C. because he had some policy jobs in town. At the time I met him, he was working in a think tank. But later he ended up working on the National Security Council. And anyways, a few years later, we were both single and we ended up dating, and the rest
Magic
is history.
Happened. You have a child.
Yes.
And now you're a military spouse, and
That's
you have
right.
a column
and I have
about
a stepson too, so we have 2 kids in our house, and it's crazy, yeah.
It's just a big change from our heyday, is all I'm saying. I
was
guess
gonna
that's
say,
where I
aren't
wanted
you
to start.
proud of us?
I am proud of us.
I think about that the first time I met you was at a bar, which makes it sounds like we went to a lot of bars.
We did. I did, at
but
least I'll speak for myself.
How far we've come.
Yeah. I mean, I still go to a bar occasionally, but I got to get home, pay the babysitter. It's like 11:30. You start thinking to yourself, is it really worth the next hour? Is this worth the extra 20? I mean, I'm sure that the babysitter will appreciate it. Anyway, okay. We're going to do some of this at the back end. What I want to talk to you about basically 2 things. One, both on the merits of them, but also the meta conversation about the media. And that is our friend Donald Trump, but also these military issues and kind of how we navigate them and the military-civilian divide and a lot of the stuff you've written about and covered for CNN. But if you don't mind, I would like to get the Trump stuff out of the way. So okay. I'm going to go to that first. But beforehand, I think kind of a good way to kind of table set, the meta part of this conversation of like how we cover Trump, how we cover military issues. I thought it might be helpful for listeners to hear like how you decide what you cover at all on the show. So maybe we could just start there. Like, what is your process? Back when you were doing New Day, now you have the afternoon show. How are you, kind of working through, what passes the bar as being worthy of the hour, given, all the stuff that's happening out there in our crazy world?
These days, there's never a slow news day. So It's more what you can fit in. It's more about, oh gosh, what do we have to leave out, right? There are some things that are just obvious, developments in the war with Israel. There was a debate last night. There were some obvious key moments that we're going to discuss. If there are legal developments with the former President Trump, we're going to talk about those. We're going to explain them and try to, put them into perspective and talk about how that might affect things. So lately it's more about what we can and then get in there and sort of what gets on the cutting room floor. I don't know. Does that answer
So do
your
you
question?
find, kind of, but I mean, when you're trying to decide, you're like, okay, what's the F block? I mean, is it you got the producers, or are you on a call, or are you on a text, or are you going, hey,
Oh, we have a morning call.
we can't get to, I guess we just can't get to Trump, confusing Joe Biden for Barack Obama today, or I guess we can't get to this, this issue at this embassy, right? Like whether it's silly or substantive, right? How do you navigate that?
I don't know. I mean, some of the little stuff, it does strike me that things that would have made it in the show 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, just won't get in there. If it's sort of like an, oh my gosh, can't believe he said that, but what's really the news value of it?
Right.
That's not as valuable as something that might really affect the race or that needs to be fact-checked, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, so this goes to kind of my Trump question. So we're taping this on Thursday. It's going to air on Sunday. So we had this debate last night, which I didn't watch, despite the fact that I'm a professional political pundit, because in my view is like, who cares, right? Like, what was the point of that debate? I guess, are we not at a point when you're assessing what might affect the race? Might Trump crazy comments at his rally in Hialeah actually be more relevant than that debate? I mean, when these guys are losing to him by 40 points, I mean, how do you do that? How do you now, like, should you be talking? Do we have to talk about Tim Scott still? I mean, I guess it's interesting that he brought his Canadian girlfriend on stage last night, but he's at 2%. He's losing by 50.
Oh, like I don't think we'll be covering that today, right? And I personally found that interesting, and texted some friends about it, like, oh, that's interesting. When it happened, because I did watch it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Did I miss something? And actually, I did. I was proud of myself that I hadn't missed it, that I did recognize that was a new face.
Got it.
But no, that's not something that's going to be in there.
Yeah.
When it comes to what Trump says, I mean, I think it's important to know where his head is. So we listen to what he says, right, at his events. And if he's going on a different direction or something that's important, we're probably going to talk about it. I hear some people, we're going to fact check it. There's this argument out there that you hear it all the time, where people will say, why do you even talk about what he says? If he is, if something is a lie, why do you put it out there? You're just amplifying it. It's going to be out there. And when you Google something, it's going to pop up. Right. Okay, well, what else pops up? The fact check of it, hopefully, that you did on your show, so that there's sort of something. I mean, a lot of times we're doing stuff on TV, but I am thinking of it in terms of doing it for perpetuity on the internet. That when something is Googled later, that is sort of attached to the moment or the topic. And it's something that will come up, that people will see. Not just, when they're viewing. I like to think that our ratings are good, but there are not that many people at any given time, but people are on the internet. Pardon me, I'm drinking kombucha because I'm on antibiotics, which I think everyone is right now. So I've got to get my probiotics.
Get your kombucha. I do think you're maybe contributing to your brand as a liberal elite by drinking kombucha, but
I mean,
please.
I know, but I have to. It's kind of like it's it's like a soda, basically.
It's a sugary kombucha.
Yeah, I don't. It's not.
That's good. It is true. This is navel-gazing, right? That's the nature of the business. I mean, obviously, like lots of people are watching CNN, and it's not nothing, but still, the people that need to hear the fact check are probably not watching daytime CNN, right? They're like getting stuff through ephemera, and I do think this is what you're saying. This stuff does live on the internet. The fact check is important. Maybe they'll see it when it comes across their TikTok feed.
Maybe they probably won't. Yeah, being honest.
Right, or maybe somebody will mention it to them, or somebody will be able to fact check it. And I always use my LSU tailgate buddies as my kind of like normie judge of like what's happening, and occasionally they'll mention something to me like, "Why did Joe Biden put the flag at half staff when Soleimani died?" And I'm like, "That didn't happen, right?" But so it's
someone
nice.
asked me, "Why does Nancy?" This was like years ago. Why is Nancy Pelosi proposing a 100% income tax? Well, but she isn't. But thanks for asking me, since I'm a congressional correspondent.
Right, I'll have this to do.
You're a resident court.
But so here's Jake on the Trump question, right? Because I think this Trump question is so hard, and I think a lot of times people are living in 2015, where maybe the answer to it was different than it is today when he's already been the president. But it's, do you cover him, do you not, right? There was the criticism in 2016 that's like, cable's showing the empty podium. We're waiting Trump to come. Maybe, they're showing these speeches for hours. Jeb can't get a word in edgewise. I think that was maybe a legitimate critique then. Now maybe the pendulum swings though. Tapper yesterday or earlier this week said, the degree to which the public is not really seeing the full Trump is really remarkable. We're not covering his rallies in the way that he used to, and we used to. And I have to wonder if that relates to his strength in the polls. He was asking this question to some strategists. But obviously it's not your guys' job to determine what affects the polls. But I do wonder if you think about that and think, well, maybe we've gone too far the other way. Maybe people do need to see unfiltered, crazy Trump so they know what they're going to get, rather than just dismissing it and saying, oh, he said this silly thing about whales in the ocean and like, why, there's serious stuff going on in Gaza. Why should we bring this up? Maybe people do need to see it if he's going to be the nominee.
Do you think they're really not seeing it though? I mean, I agree with Jake that we're kind of seeing less, but he's also busy. He's got 4 particularly large pressing issues right now, right? I mean, he's got a lot 4 on his plate, being glib about it aside, serious things.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of stuff taking up his time. I mean, this particular week, he was in court in Manhattan talking about something that we know does take up a lot of headspace for him. So I think it makes sense we're not seeing so much of him. But he's still out there, he still communicates. You still see some of his unfiltered things. You've seen his speaking appearances. It's not like we're not fully, it's not like that's completely gone. I don't know if the pendulum has swung the other way. I do think we're a year out. And, to the degree that Trump can sort of show some self-control, we have seen with him deciding not to be in these debates that there's a little bit of a do no harm approach, when he can pull that off. He's polling exceptionally well as the front runner.
Exceptionally well.
Which is why we should be paying attention to him.
Right.
With a critical eye. But it's also why he's trying to preserve that advantage. Maybe that's why we're not seeing him as well, but there's a lot of time left.
Yeah, I don't, know that there's a good answer. So the thing I always come back to is, remember in our glory days back when we were at the bar in 2012, Mitt Romney did a gaffe. Do you remember this gaffe, the 47% gaffe?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That was a pretty big one. It was big news. It was a mistake. I'm not saying it wasn't a mistake. It was a pretty dumb thing to say that 47% of America is not capable of, making decisions for themselves because they're on the teat of the government. Wasn't Mitt's best moment. But, if you put the 47% gaffe in the middle of Trump's speech last night in Hialeah, it would not have made the show. It would not have made your show. It would not have made the network. It wouldn't have even made the Bulwark. We have Trump derangement syndrome. It would, he says so much crazy shit all the time that it does just get glossed over, right? And you'd wonder if Joe Biden, on the other hand, if Joe Biden confused Donald Trump with Ronald Reagan, and he's like, my opponent, Ronald Reagan. There would be segments on CNN that's like, is Joe Biden losing it? Does he have dementia? Right? And Donald Trump does that, and it's like, well, he can't cover this. I mean, it's like he says so much crazy shit. So is there an imbalance? How do you navigate that? How do you navigate what's newsworthy for Trump versus what would be newsworthy for other guys or women?
I mean, just to jump off of your example with the Biden thing, I think confusing him for Ronald Reagan would be, that's pretty big.
Maybe a hyperbolic comparison.
I think if Trump did something like that, it would get covered, both of them up in years.
But Trump does call Biden Obama sometimes now. He calls Biden Obama.
Yeah, but that to me is, I don't know, it's sort of more adjacent, right?
A normal senior moment? Okay.
Those two, or just a normal person moment.
Yeah, sure.
I can think of someone else that maybe Biden could mistakenly say the name or something, that wouldn't be as weird. But yeah, I guess if your point is that they are held to different standards, right?
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, but I think
not
that's
even
part of the
Biden.
reason
Trump
why...
is held to a different standard as everyone else.
Well,
everyone
that's
else.
right.
Right. Yeah.
Because of the extremity of his behavior.
Yeah.
And that's why Joe Biden was elected, because people expect something different from him, right? And they decided they wanted something different. But that was a choice in itself, that they were looking at the standard they wanted and Trump didn't fit it and Biden did, because obviously, look, Trump has a lot of people. There's a cult of personality around Trump that there is not around Biden. And they still chose Biden. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's human nature. Think about how you deal with the people in your life. You invite people to Thanksgiving. Your husband's like pretty normal, but then you have like a really crazy uncle. Okay, well, if your husband starts, behaving like your crazy uncle at the table, you're going to be more alarmed than what your normal crazy uncle behavior is. It's just sort of human nature, I think. Now, that may not be fair in politics, but I think it's natural. Maybe.
It is human nature. It's just, it's a little concerning when the crazy uncle is winning in the polls in a landslide in the primary and in the general now in the New York Times. And it's like, I don't know, maybe there's a way to make sure that everybody knows that he's, because I do think that there's like maybe this false assumption that everybody already knows that he's a crazy uncle, so there's no point in talking about it anymore. But but people forget. People have short memories.
I think people get they start obsessing with Trump's behavior as a person.
Yeah.
I think that it's an interesting exercise to look at what makes Trump appeal to people. There's a reason why he does, right? So what are their concerns? What are their concerns that they do not feel are answered by other Republicans, that they do not feel are answered by the kind of more traditional Republican Party or the Democratic Party? What's not being answered? What shifts them towards that cult of personality? Okay, what questions need to be, like, and my perspective as a journalist is, okay, well, they have valid concerns. It is motivating their behavior. Questions need to be asked on behalf of that perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
I agree with that. And one thing that I've liked about your coverage, and that's my last meta kind of question about this, but is that balance, just like I'm saying, just like there's balance in what to cover and what not to cover, there's balance in how to deal with these guys, right? And I think that sometimes, you can be, oh, I'm going to be on my high horse and moralize, right? And then sometimes you can be, oh, I'm just going to kind of go along and act like this isn't crazy. And like both of those have their own problems. And I think you've done a good job of balancing, like when you have somebody on your show, of just treating them like, okay, I'm gonna make sure what you're saying is accurate. Like, and we're just gonna focus on that, right? And we're gonna focus on what people's concerns are and try to press them on that. Like, how do you think about that? Obviously, you're very thorough in prepping for these things, considering that you sent me a memo for my own podcast this morning, which I appreciate.
I wanted you to know some of the military issues that sort of float my boat.
Just joking.
I think people should know, like, when I go into these interviews, with folks who, I mean, let's be honest, sometimes I know I'm going into interviews with people who may not be answering questions in good faith, right? Let's put it that way.
You don't say.
So I do a couple of things. Like I try my best to be very prepared and have a sense of where the interview is going to go. But I'd say, like, on those kind of interviews that maybe are more interesting than other ones, like half of them kind of go off the rails. I don't see where they end up going, and I end up throwing out my plan. So I'm prepared and ready to throw out the plan, because sometimes it's taken in a direction I didn't anticipate. And so I'm like, all right, let's explore this. Okay, we'll back it up. Well, what's the evidence? And then sometimes I just know that something isn't true, or it doesn't pass the smell test. Like I think a recent one was
they can get away with stuff.
Plot.
One thing that I think you're really good at is they think they can get away with stuff just like throwing out random facts as they're spitballing. And this is when you're talking throwing out the plan. I remember an interview you did with one of the Trump spokesmen during the coronavirus time, right, where he starts just kind of like making some points about the other options, like hydroxychloroquine and all this, and you're like, well, wait a minute, let's talk about this. Like, is that really something that the White House should be telling people that they should be doing, right? And I think that's like a good, going into the micro is a good way to kind of deal with these guys when they're just throwing out bullshit.
And if you have 6 minutes with someone, you cannot cover everything. And I always believe that you are better off covering, if you have like a foot of territory to cover, but you really can't, you're better covering like an inch of it really well. You just are, because this is cable news. We have all the time in the world. You can have them on some other time to discuss something else.
Right.
But if you're just kind of glossing over stuff and it's really superficial, I think that that's less helpful than really digging into something.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, last thing on Trump, because it relates to our other topic. Have you been surprised by... this is usually the question people ask me as a former Republican, so I'm reveling getting to turn the camera on this. But like, these reports of him, calling veterans suckers and losers, the way he treated the Blue Star parent in the Oval Office, obviously the McCain stuff. Like, have you just both as a journalist, but also now as a military spouse, have you been kind of surprised at how muted the reaction to that has been? Like, what do you think explains that? This is all I just give 3 examples. I could have given 9 of stuff that were, to call it a third rail is kind of an understatement. Things that were sacred in the Republican Party, and it just hasn't had an impact on them. How do you process that?
I think that, how do I process it? I think to explain it, what's clear is that a lot of his supporters, their allegiance to him supersedes. We've seen it supersedes their allegiance to their family members, right? We've seen it get in the way of relationships that previously were built on intense dedication and love. So am I surprised that they dismiss their ideas about patriotism? No, I'm not surprised by that. I also think it has to do with hardly anyone serves in the military. Hardly anyone is service connected. This is the 50th anniversary of the all-volunteer force. And what that means is that a very few serve. And so no one's really connected to it. And so I think people have these vague notions of patriotism and what it takes. I'll be honest, that's how I used to be. And then I married a Green Beret, and I had my eyes opened very wide about what it means and what service members shoulder and what it takes to be a family member supporting that person. In terms of, Donald Trump, his biggest motivator has been, for him, is making money. That's been the driving factor in his life. It's not an incredibly lucrative career, being in the military, but it's a career that takes incredible sacrifice. You're
not getting a jet out of this? You don't have
you're not getting a personal jet. You might get a jet. You might be on a jet. But you're risking a lot. It's not it's not, to be clear, the most deadly profession by far. I think logging is by far, but it's that risk of doing something where you could die, and that is a wild thing if you really sit with that for a minute. So I just think that kind of goes against things that have motivated him through his life.
That's an understatement, but I'll save the full Trump TDS assessment of his personality for a different podcast. This is related though to the question about now the big news right now surrounding military and military families and promotions, which is what's happening with Tuberville and the Senate. Do you make that connection there? Has it not penetrated as much, because he doesn't have the cult that Trump does, right? So has it not penetrated because of this military civilian divide, or just the fact that other Republicans have been too cowardly to take him on until very recently with Dan Sullivan and Lindsey Graham, speaking? What's your, it's hard to be surprised these days. I don't know about you, but I've been pretty surprised by how long this has gone on, and it's crazy. We have multiple wars happening, and we have all these folks that aren't getting promoted. What explains the lack of salience on this?
So this started in February, and the effects of Tuberville's hold on, which is now I think almost 400 general and flag officers across the military. It's not an immediate effect, first off. So there was kind of a cushion for this really kicking in, and I think that gave Republicans a little bit of time. Couple things have accelerated it. One is well, time's up, right? We've seen it trickle down. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, like we got to that deadline, and they moved forward with that and a couple other appointments. And then the Marine Corps Commandant just had a heart attack.
Right.
Well, he didn't have a backup, and the guy filling in for him then also was doing 2 jobs. So it was like, what, he's responsible for 4. But the big thing right now is there's a big threat of this war between Israel and Hamas becoming a larger regional war. We were talking earlier about this strike on Iranian-backed assets,
Yes.
and the U.S. has done, and it's not gotten a lot of attention because maybe it is just one little thing, but I would be really surprised if it's the last thing. You've got all these U.S. military assets mobilized in the region, and trust me, military families are feeling this because they're either on alert or their loved one has been deployed now to do this,
Right.
just to be in the region, to provide that kind of support, to be deterrent effect to Iran. And so Republicans who are incredibly, supportive of Israel are really starting to go, oh my God, this is not the time to have all these officers not in place. And then that's why they came out against him.
Yeah. I'll get back to Tuberville, but this point on the proxy attacks, I think, is so important. I don't know. I mean, I think that there has to be a lot of angst in military, kind of circles, in active duty circles in particular about this expansion. It's something that's kind of flummoxed me. I don't have a good answer to, is why we've had now several attacks on, there's one that's been particularly, that was successful, I guess, or however you want to describe it. But we've had several attacks on military bases in the region now. It doesn't seem like to me that this is going to slow down, and it kind of has been downplayed a little bit by the administration, and it's covered a little bit in the media. You guys have covered it, but I don't know, like what's the feeling about this? There's as far as both among the military community, but also you as CNN, as you guys are trying to decide how much attention to place on all that.
I mean, I think we're paying attention to it. Yeah. I will say being a military spouse informs how I cover events because I'm keenly aware of it, just how it affects people on the human level. But I think when it comes to service members and military families, yeah, your concern level sort of goes up. But also, this is what people sign up to do. They don't sign up to join the military to just sit around. There's a reason why recruitment goes down when there are fewer conflicts. Sometimes people clearly you talk to them, there's something going on, there's some action to have. They want to know what that's about. That's sort of it's a very unique experience. They're curious about it. It's part of why people, if you're not okay with that, you're not joining the military. So Right. It's part of the reason why people are in the military. So it's just kind of baked into why you're there. But obviously there's concerns at the family level, obviously, and of course.
Yeah. I want to get to the underlying part of the Tuberville holds, because I think it relates to all these, the military is just so wrapped up in the culture war right now, right? And you've done some interviews. I watched some of your interviews this morning about it, on CRT and on race-related stuff and now abortion. And so just on the abortion and women serving, right? Gay people serve, trans people serving, right? Like all of this, this is why, Mark Milley, has been kind of the tip of the spear of this as being criticized. And that is kind of what is underlying these holds. And so I just, you've done reporting on this and interviews, it all there's maybe misogyny to this, right? Like this, or is it just culture war? I mean, just talk about the practical elements of what is the whole reason for this? Having women having access to care.
Well, okay, those are a lot of things. I'm going to take this a couple things.
First, take whichever one you want out of that.
Very specifically about Tommy Tuberville. Let's just be clear. Tommy Tuberville has an issue with the abortion travel policy of the U.S. military, which, by the way, is not used by that many people. But the Biden administration feels that it sends a signal to people. If you live in a state where you cannot access abortion services, they're not paying for abortions. They're paying for travel of a service member or a dependent to go and get one if they need it. Republicans who oppose this will say, hey, that's just fungible. You shouldn't even be paying for them to travel. And, this is very popular with Tommy Tuberville's constituents and a lot of Republican constituents who are anti-abortion. The issue with Tommy Tuberville is that he lacks some basic knowledge about the military. If you have an issue with a policy like this isn't something that these admirals and these generals came up with. This was the Biden administration, these civilian oversight of the military, which is, I think, and it's a hallmark of the American military. It keeps things very stable, and it's kind of a special thing in America. So you have a beef with one of their policies, you address it with the civilians overseeing the military. I don't actually know if Tommy Tuberville lacks basic knowledge about the military. He's shown this consistently. He confuses Space Command with Space Force. There's just he needs some information. I don't know if he's interested in getting it. He seems right now to have gotten a lot of attention, and he doesn't really seem to care. Wrapped up in sort of this idea of wokeness or liberal policies, I think this does sort of speak to something that some Republicans would say, yes, this is part of how the military is woke. I don't know if...
Yeah, and I guess that's what, and I'm having you hit the underlying kind of actual substance of this policy, but that's where I was going, right, is in a different time, where the military was just not so wrapped up into our culture war. I think, even on an issue like abortion, that's been, a long held important issue among Republican politicians, this kind of assault on military readiness and all this, it just would have been totally not acceptable, right? Just because of the sacred nature of which Republicans have treated the military historically. But that has changed over the last few years. I think has created an opening for this, right? I think there just is this sense that, the military is a place where this social experimentation is happening. The military is getting soft. Women are serving, gays are serving, right? And I think that now we're paying for people to go travel to get abortions. The next thing you know, we're going to pay for people to go, get top surgery, right? I think that there's this hostility towards the military that's coming from the right, which is kind of a new thing that has opened the door to this. And I just don't I guess I'm just curious on your perspective of, is that something that is happening just in the political realm? Are the families that you interview, is that something you're seeing from the bottom up when you're talking to families? How do you kind of assess that?
There is a lot of buy-in from those in the military who are conservative. The military, when you can control for different aspects of where people come from, their age, education level, how much money they make, right? And religion, race, ethnicity, these kinds of things, you're actually going to see a reflection of American society. So what you see in American society, you're going to see in the military. Yes, there are people in the military who love the military, but feel that it is being sort of overtaken by a woke sort of ideology. DEI is a bad word. They don't want any of that going on. And, when Tommy Tuberville is criticized for these holds and say, why are you doing this when the military is having a recruitment crisis? And he'll say, it's not about this. It's about the woke military. That's why there's a recruitment crisis. No, that's not why there's a recruitment crisis. There's a recruitment crisis because increasingly most people are not even eligible to serve. You have a full labor market. When people see stories about the military, which I personally think is a wonderful calling, but that there are a lot of challenges to being a service member, what do they see? Sexual assault, right? Lots of health issues, toxic exposure, a lot of sacrifice. This is not a casual profession. And so those are challenges. And those are the things that are creating a recruitment crisis. But the truth is, you need women. It's not a nice thing to have women in the military when only less than a quarter of Americans are even candidates to join the military. And then half of those people, guess what? They're women. Half of that quarter is women. So you need to make it a place where women can work. I think that what you've seen with this, it's not just political, it is in practice. And I think that it's a reaction There's sort of there was Me Too, and we've seen a reaction in the civilian world. There was Black Lives Matter and sort of that whole summer of racial reckoning. And you saw that play out as well in the military, and you saw military leaders at the time actually get a lot of, they really sort of led on that. And they talked about how racism was playing out in the military and things needed to be changed. We saw this stuff about the Confederate names of bases and that kind of thing. And there has been a transformation of that. And now you're seeing a reaction.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the Confederate bases. Before I forget, I have another theory about the recruitment crisis, by the way, which goes against my, kind of Bush era, political views. But I think that you have to assess reality. I mean, if you're 19 right now, you've lived in a world where every military thing that we've done has been a disaster, right? Like Iraq was a disaster. Afghanistan was less of a disaster, but pretty bad. The exit from Afghanistan was a disaster and ugly. And so it's like, why am I signing up for that? You know what I mean? Why am I signing up for this? I think that we have to have, there has to be accountability for the politicians and the military leadership. That why isn't recruitment happening? I don't think it's because they're scared of woke stuff, right?
No, I would agree with you. But also you had a whole generation that signed up after Vietnam,
That's
right?
True.
Although honestly, Vietnam, for what a sort of abysmal war that was, it was so short compared to Iraq and Afghanistan. It's wild to think about it. But also 9/11 was incredibly inspirational for people reacting to that and wanting to go fight. So you did have that, which I think factored in for people in Vietnam and didn't, right?
Yeah, galvanizing. Anyway, but just one more thing on the woke thing, because you talked to this, you did a great interview with Congressman Waltz, what I was watching this morning. And I just, in addition to the recruitment issues you're talking about women, it's a diversifying country, right? And a number of young people, there are just more Black and brown people that would be qualifying, right? And it kind of surprised me when you were doing that interview.
I'm married to one of them.
Yeah, there you go. One thing that I didn't know is just Robert E. Lee's name is all over West Point, right? This is just one example, right? And then you have there's VMI and there are others, and it's I don't know. I could see how that would be an impact for a young Black kid. That's why I don't want to live in the Robert E. Lee dorm.
Well,
sorry.
The Robert E. Lee barracks. I asked my husband, Fernando. Okay. Did you live in the Robert E. Lee barracks at West Point? I don't think he did. But as an example, military service tends to be siloed in families. If your mother or father served, you are more likely to serve. There tends to be a little bit of a Southern tradition in it. That's the sort of family silo kind of runs through the South. Mm-hmm. My husband's from Texas. Our kids, right? So my stepson is Black and Hispanic. Our younger son is Hispanic and white. And especially when I think, my stepson idolizes his dad. And the chance that he would go into the military is higher.
How old's your stepson?
7.
7. Yeah.
So the chance that he would go into the military is higher, maybe. He just idolizes my husband. And I think about him. Okay, my husband went to West Point, and I think about my stepson going, and I'm thinking, really, is he gonna walk under Robert E. Lee Gate or stay in Robert E. Lee barracks? That's odd. And he's not going to. I don't believe, because I think it's very much in the works that a lot of these things are being eliminated. Robert E. Lee attended West Point. But yeah, you may not know it, but there's this whole thing going on right now in the military where they are getting rid of a lot of Confederate names. Fort Bragg is now Fort Liberty. Interesting, They did not rename it after someone else. They renamed it after a concept. But Fort Hood in Texas is Fort Cavazos, so it was named after someone.
Yeah. I don't think the German kids are going to, Himmler barracks. I think that there's some basic things we can change about that. I wanted to move to the home front stuff. You've been talking about your husband. I guess what I'm most curious about is that this was a change for you, right? Because you did. have military family in your background, but still, right? Like
not
it is
like that I experienced the life though. By the time I was like an age to remember things, my dad was in the Australian Navy. I was like 2 when he got out, so I don't remember anything.
Hold on, just quick pause. Is the Australian Navy like a thing? I mean, do they have boats? What do they have down there?
Ships, yes,
they got ships.
Boats.
Australia, you got your own ships. Really?
Yep.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
What is, are they like our old ships that we give to
No,
Australia?
They have their own.
Okay, wow.
You know, the Australian U.S. You know, this whole thing, the Australian-U.S. military alliance was like a big deal for trying to see. Anyways,
I'm just kidding. I kind of had forgotten before I was doing this that your dad was Australian. Do you ever think about, like, during as we're staring down the barrel of a 2020 election repeat, do you ever think that maybe you and Fernando and the fam should just like relocate to Canberra? Does that ever cross your mind?
I was born in Canberra. If I was going to relocate, it would probably be to another city. But no, I'm not going to. I mean, Tim, like, I'm sticking around.
I know you love America, but I just, anyway, it's just I kind of forgot that. Okay, your dad's in there, but it's a different life, right? So, like, what was the biggest original, like, eye-opening wake-up call? Like, what was the first thing that you're like, oh shit, like, I didn't consider that this was
well, there was a big one of those. First off, I thought Fernando was kind of done deploying, and then he wasn't.
Was that a communicate? Was that maybe an intentional communications gray area during the dating?
So it's in a way I understand this. Like in TV news, as an anchor, I operate in contracts that are generally like 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And when you're in the military, you operate in, assignments like billets, and they're generally 2 or 3 years. So you never know what you're going to do. You could go work at the Pentagon. He was kind of up in years in his career. When I married him, he was a lieutenant colonel. Okay. And he'd been in combat for years at that point.
Where was he in combat?
Before we were together, like when we got married, he was here in Washington, D.C. But before that, it was Iraq and Afghanistan. And initially, he was part of 7th Group Special Forces, which is based in the Spanish-speaking countries. So he was in Colombia. That was like his first real kind of big deployment with anti-FARC.
That's
forces, helping like Colombia Special Forces. So it kind of seemed like maybe that was done, like he was going to be a desk job kind of guy. Well, you know what? That's not what happened. All of a sudden, he was shipping out to the Middle East, and he had been gone for, I don't know, like a week and change, and I found out I was pregnant. So...
Well, that's, I guess, good. I guess it's better that you were pregnant before.
Great, I was no spring chicken, so I was very happy to be pregnant. But it was just all of a sudden a very different deployment. I was going to be alone for practically an entire pregnancy, and I was caring for my stepson on my husband's custodial time. So now I'm, morning sickness by myself.
You're also on television. Were you on the morning show then? Were you on New Day?
No, I wasn't. Okay. I don't think I could have done that, honestly. No, I was anchoring the No, I wasn't. I wasn't anchoring the afternoons. I was like in between things.
Got it.
So, and then I just found that I was confronting things I didn't know that I would have to. I was like a little worried about him, even though I didn't really need to be all that worried about him, but there's just sort of unknown. Like a lot of the work he would do, I'm not privy to details of it, right? Yeah. So I would worry about things. Mostly it's just the logistical challenges of being alone in like at-home life during a deployment. And I was the weird thing too was I was like 37, I think at the time. And I'd been at CNN for a long time. I've been here for over 10 years. I had a really established friend group. And all of a sudden, it just wasn't cutting it. Like everyone, I'd felt very much on the same frequency as everyone. And now I'm going through something that mostly everyone around me cannot identify with. And I was feeling incredibly lost. And it was then that I kind of plugged into the military family community.
Yeah.
But I was almost like embarrassed by how little I had known about what it took just to get through this process.
I'm sure. And so then are you plugging in with the military spouse community? It's like you and a bunch of 23-year-olds, or like what was the...
No, I actually, so there, of course, that is, there are 23-year-olds, mostly military spouses, but there's also like a ton of military spouses my age, and generally they had their kids younger than me,
Right.
which was a blessing for me, because then they were telling me, like, I would tell my civilian friends stuff and they'd be like, that's insane. And then I tell like a military spouse friend whose kids were like a little older and they were about my age and they were professional women who were holding down jobs and had been through deployment. And they'd be like, yeah, no, that's normal.
Right.
And just hearing someone say like, yeah, that's totally normal. Oh, he said he was going to maybe get out of the military. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Just that kind of stuff. Like, it'll be a few more years. He's just warming up the idea of it or something,
Sure.
Just the stuff they would tell me would be like, oh, okay, great. Thanks. Thanks for like, just setting expectations is really helpful.
Yeah. Life planning may be a little different. Okay.
Yeah.
If I'm digging too deep here, you can just let me know. But I'm curious. Right. So you have a stepson, right? And it's like, he's gone for all this time, right? You have to parenting. So like, that is something you have to deal with that I'm sure that was obviously very unique for you, but other families have to deal with, right? Like, you've got a kid, how the kids deal with having a dad gone for so long.
Yeah.
And you got dumped in the deep end on that.
So important. And families make different decisions about this. Like, I've heard people make all kinds of decisions. A mom who had a baby in the Navy, who's a friend of mine, and she decided she decided basically to deploy or to go to training when the baby was only 6 weeks old. She was trying to get something out of the way. In retrospect, it was not a good idea.
Yeah.
When my stepson was, my husband deployed when my stepson was about 18 months old. And it was like a year and a half old. And it turned out to be fine. He was actually capable of, he wasn't super verbal, but right. he liked to show daddy that he was walking the dog. And he would talk to him on the iPhone, and he would draw pictures for him. And they didn't miss a step, right?
That's
they
great.
really didn't. But then the next time my husband deployed was shortly after our youngest, who is 5 now. He was only like, I want to say he was like a few months old, 5 months old, something. And so he was really gone from like, right, I think when I feel like they start being able to see your face
right. Yeah.
for like another year, roughly.
Oh,
I'm being rough about this.
Yeah.
And that was tough. I mean, he was such a mama's boy, and it took a long time for them to rebuild. Whereas with our other child, it was just so easy for them.
One of the other things you sent me that like I hadn't, like all this, like I'm like you. I feel I'm like embarrassed sometimes by my lack of military knowledge. I at least own it. I was, at least in Republican campaigns, there was always military guys around, so I could always, if something came up, I could always be like, I'm calling John Noonan, and he could tell me, so I don't sound like an idiot on this interview. But one of the things you sent me that I just didn't even think about is like employment for people, for the spouses, for the family members who are back home. Like it's just so hard, right? Because, you're talking about how in your personal experience, it's like, okay, it was kind of hard to plan everything because it's like I thought he might be done and then he gets sent out again and there's a short window for dealing with that, but you're in a career, right? For people that are getting sent around to different places, some of these bases, let's be honest, are not exactly in areas that are, economically thriving. That's something that I hadn't even really like kind of considered. Like, what was your, when did that like pop up on your radar? And you've done some reporting on that.
As soon as I sort of got into the military family community and started reporting on the issues that affect them, that was the first one that popped up, because military spouses have depression era level unemployment. And you can draw a line from that to so many ills in military family life. Food insecurity, that's kind of embarrassing. It's just ridiculous. How are military families like not able to have enough food? It's like
that's crazy. It's so crazy. It's almost like, is that really real? Like, you've talked to people, you've talked to families?
It's true. I was not just talking. These statistics are out, and there's even clearer ones that were just released this week. It's like during the pandemic, 1 in 8 military families was accessing a food bank. This is serious business, especially, and it's not just like, these are families. These are people who've actually been in the military. Think about that time where, and you only have the service member earning, and then maybe you have 2 or 3 kids, and you've started to climb up the ladder. So you have an income, but now you have more mouths to feed and a lot of expenses. As we know, like having small kids is so expensive.
Yeah.
And
moving is expensive.
Moving's expensive, and they end up paying stuff out of pocket.
Yeah.
And so now you're just at that. Childcare is expensive if you're gonna, and so there's just a point where there's like almost like a donut hole for a lot of families. So there's, the employment part. Also, military spouses, like, they tend to be more highly trained and educated than their cohorts, than their civilian cohorts. It's not like there's this, some people, there's sort of like a meme about military spouses, and it's completely unfair because writ large, they're, like I said, with the education and the training, they're really quite a valuable source for people looking to employ them, but they also move every 2 to 3 years. So if you are an employer, you're thinking, oh, do I want to hire this person who's moving in 2 years? There's always legislation going through Congress trying to maybe put in a tax incentive, but that needs a pay for. That costs money. So it's hard to attach it to something, and it always kind of fails. There's another one right now that Senators Boozman and Kane have put up, but I don't know if it's going to pass. It like never passes, but eventually maybe it will, Yeah. And it's just, I just think it's just really a shame, and they're such great employees because they manage so much stuff. I mean, you can train someone to do anything, but it's like getting an employee who gets stuff done without complaining, can actually multitask and just take care of everything. That's an amazing set of just skills to bring to a job.
Okay, last thing before we get to rapid fire. This is your first Veterans Day with your spouse. Is finally a veteran? It's official? He's not going back
official.
It's
done, official.
Done? Okay, that's great. What is that like? I guess it's a 2-part last question. It's I'm curious about the re-entry. What's that like? Is ever, as hard as the separation is there ever a time where he's like, I could use one more deployment? Like the re-entry has to be a little bit challenging for military families too, and just on as veterans issues, like as you're reporting on this, like what is the thing that's coming to the top concern for those families right now?
So re-entry is really hard because it's like the end of an identity in a way,
right?
And that we went through an adjustment as my husband was getting out. It was now an adjustment's an understatement, not. So it's just not so fun. They're like grapple. It's like, in a way, it's like losing a job or retiring. There's this really hard adjustment. So we're through that.
Ego is wrapped up in this. Ego is wrapped up, right? Like
for sure.
especially,
but also, like,
I think,
like if you're like important and you're doing something exciting, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm at home.
You're needed,
it's just,
like you're really
I'm a
needed.
potted
And it's
plant.
like, I gotta go to the grocery store today, and like sometimes I could totally see like mental health, like how you getting out of bed,
sure.
right? You're like, I don't even want to get out of bed.
And
what's
even
the point?
Coming back from deployments, it's called reintegration.
Yeah,
it's a serious thing. You have to, like from the very beginning, we got a couples counselor before he ever deployed because I knew I'd read about it, and I was like, oh, this sounds like a disaster. We better get prepared.
Yeah.
It was like the best thing we ever did. It was so good. It's gotten us through so many ups and downs.
I'm just imagining in my head, right? Like you're like doing your super prep. You're like, I got a big interview today. I got on the show at 1, and you're like, what are you up to? And it's like, well, I'm gonna go to Bed Bath and Beyond. I gotta go to Home Depot, and like that's nice for like a week, and then it's like
a PhD. So
I know he's got other stuff to do. I know he's got other stuff to do. I'm just saying, there are days, right? Like that where that imbalance, like you go from this one thing that's so weighty to
totally
stuff that,
And look, he likes being out and about, So wait, what was the other thing you asked?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I just on the reporting side. Like the PACT Act just passed, but are there other things that are like below the radar that just are like the veterans families that like come to the top when you're interviewing them, when you're going to the Blue Star events, like,
employment is a big one. Like financial stuff is a big one. But also health is a big one. The PACT Act right now, you've got almost 40% increase in VA claims, so it's like a record. over fiscal year 2023, and that's because of the passage of that Toxic Exposure Act.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of people who are actually starting to get treatment for stuff.
Thank God.
That weren't getting it before. That's good news. It also means you've got a VA that's responding to that.
Right.
So that's a big challenge.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Mental health is big. This is one that just really I'm always thinking about, because the military, you've people who serve, they do. My observation has been that, look, this is a stressful life, and I think people of all stripes, know about mental health. They know about mental health challenges that come about because of situational things, right? You have like a tough 6 months at work, you end up depressed, you have anxiety or something. What do? You get a counselor, maybe you get on some meds for a little while or short term, and you're fine. You just throw some resources at it. That doesn't happen in the military as much. You can't, a lot of times, I think there's this reticence to seek help.
Yeah.
Because there is a feeling, and I think it's founded, that it's going to affect your career. That becomes something that is in practice, and then that becomes something that is adopted as a culture that carries over to veterans, not seeking the help they need until they are extremely in crisis. And you see there's a suicide crisis with veterans. There's also an issue with service members as well. And the military needs to do more. They're trying to do more. That's linked also with sexual assault. It's terrible, the numbers on sexual assault. It's like that problem. They try to solve it, and it just gets worse. And they're now trying to fix things at bases and places that are training facilities that are most impacted. So they're trying. They are trying, but we're seeing these things really affect the population.
I'm sure Tommy Tuberville's holds are really helping resolve all those issues. Having fewer people, I'm sure, is helping. Okay. I want to get to rapid fire. Last thing, you're involved in a lot of groups. So before we get to rapid fire, just is there anything for folks, Veterans Day, want to contribute, want to volunteer, want to donate? Is there anything you want to shout out?
Just a number of veteran service organizations and military family service organizations. Full disclosure, I'm on the board of Blue Star Families, but it does great work. It's the leading military family organization. But for veterans, personally, I donate to IAVA, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. That's a personal choice because I live with a veteran of those wars. And I love TAPS. I do a lot of work with TAPS. They assist Gold Star families. But there's a lot of great organizations. So I do not, those are just a few that I am closely associated with and appreciate their work.
All right. Rapid fire, we're going to get you back to your job. Okay. I'm looking for, we kind of did this, but I usually ask people, the first rapid fire question is usually what people have changed their mind on as they've grown up. So you can take that if you want. But I'm also interested in what about your view of the kind of military life has changed, since you've been able to, since it's become so personal?
My view of the military life, I think I would just say this. It has taught me about how you can be proud to be part of something, and also how you can see the problems in it and, want things to improve. I've been a proud so I have to use the past tense. I've been a proud military spouse. I do a lot of stories about things that need to be improved in the military. And I think that's actually like a service. Maybe that's part of my patriotism. Yeah,
that's really important and great. One idea for bridging the civilian-military divide. We didn't really get into that. Do you have any great? Because it's just, it is so stark.
Yeah. It's like a fraction of 1% of people serve, so it's not that many people connected. Listen, I think people should, if you know someone who's connected to the military, ask questions. And just inform yourself. You're paying for this, Americans. That's my thing always. It's like, this is so expensive, this defense budget. You're invested in it, literally. This is what so much of taxpayer dollars go for. it's really important to pay attention to what you're spending your money on.
Do you watch any other news anchors out there, CNN or otherwise? You think, man, that person's doing it really well.
Yeah, Jake Tapper does a lot of stuff. You mean on like veteran stuff?
No, I was moving on to general, but sure, you can.
Oh, general stuff.
Yeah, anything.
I love a lot of this. I love both things.
Maybe we should change this question because I'm gonna get you in trouble with your CNN colleagues. All of your CNN colleagues are great.
Okay,
Do you look
pick
across at other networks or other reporters and you think, man, that interview style was really good, or that that the way that they're covering this, I think is good. Have you tried to model yourself after anybody?
Shout out to Jennifer Griffin.
Man, she does good.
I don't know that I necessarily model. I just
sure.
appreciate her backbone.
I totally agree with that.
It's not what I do, but I appreciate Kara Swisher's interview style. In that she brings like a familiarity, but there's no like sucky upness about her.
Yeah.
Like, if you're doing an interview with her, you better watch out.
Yeah.
But she's also can be, like there's a friendliness about it that'll like watch out.
Great pick.
Like
we got
that.
Scott Galloway on this pod next week. So her partner in crime.
He's great.
He's great. So maybe we'll get
he's
maybe
great.
Kara. You're next. Okay.
He's great. And I also have friends other places who I really like them, but I feel like I can't pick my friends. Okay. Like you can't do that.
You can if you want. You can pick a friend. Do you have a dream interview do you want to do?
Oh, and Jonathan Swan.
Oh man, he's so good. We don't need we brag about Jonathan Swan on this podcast enough. He doesn't need any more love. But he's been really good. Dream interview? Do you have one? Do you have somebody that you haven't done that you want to get?
Or new interview? Oh, I know I should have an answer to that.
You don't have one. You're just like whatever.
Sorry.
Whatever.
Yeah.
You'll do it. You'll just you put them up. You put it on the tee and you'll knock it. It doesn't matter. Okay. Well, last one is I've now left Washington. You're now a parent. So I think that the kind of haunts that we would go to are different, but I'm looking for now advice. I'm back in D.C. next week. Like, do you have a favorite restaurant, a favorite bar, somewhere I should go, somewhere to take a kid? You have to take a kid. Anything. No, anything. I'm okay. Like I'm out. The D.C. changes so much. Like I was in town a couple months ago, and I'm like at the waterfront or whatever they call it now, where the new politics and prose is.
That's where you have to take your daughter.
Yeah.
That's great. Because you can take her to like Hanks on the Wharf.
Hanks on the Wharf. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so many great places on the wharf you can go with kids. And but do you know where I went recently? It was so strange. This place called Strange and Cool. It's a Quebecois. It is on poutine, and it's a disco bar. This was the weirdest.
Where?
North Adams Morgan, and I really mean like north of the Strip.
Got it. Okay.
I do not I hardly go out.
I sometimes stay at that hotel at the top of the Strip when I'm in
town. My pandemic superpower was making craft cocktails, and I just kind of and I have friends with kids, so like I invite them over on a Friday. Everyone pieces out at 7, and that's what we do to put our kids to bed. Like lame.
It is so good. It is lame. It's a whole new world. I got my first kindergarten report card today, and I'm just like, it's a whole new life.
Do you get behavioral reports, or is that just me?
What's that?
Behavioral reports?
My child is well behaved, so I am getting behavioral reports, but it's all thumbs up. Not what's happening.
You can give me some tips.
I don't think I have any tips to give. It's definitely, I think it is my husband. I was like, you're lucky that you got one of your, he's a rule follower. I was like, these were not the behavior reports my parents were getting. So I'm very pleased, and I get no credit, and it's just all a blessing. Brianna, thank you so much for spending all this time with me. You were great. I wish I could come on your show anymore, but I have a contract now. But one of these times we can do this again.
You come, I'll take you to this poutine place that one of the youngs here at work took me to.
I'm excited about that. Quebecois. Yeah. We need to know. Stuart Stevens, I always have to think about that because he's like, if things get really hairy in the next Trump term for Never Trumpers, if they are opening up Guantanamo for us, he's like, I got a place in Quebec City. So, maybe I need to go to the Quebecois place to test it out, to kind of see what the food's going to be like if I'm a political refugee. Anyway, Brianna, thank you so much. I very much appreciate you. We'll be talking.
Thanks, Tim.